Welcome back to From the Bridge. This is Rick Jones, your captain, chef, and chief bottle washer, coming to you from the low country of South Carolina. The great Tennessee Williams once wrote, "In memory, everything seems to happen to music." The sad thing about music licensing, and we do work for the largest music licensing company in the world in BMI, so I'll have to explain myself, but the saddest part for me is that we can't actually play the songs that we listen to as we prepare each podcast. I'm either hearing a song in my head or I'm hearing a song in the background as I prepare each episode of From the Bridge. This morning, the soundtrack in my head is the Al Jolson classic version of Carolina in the Morning. You know that one. Nothing could be finer than to be in Carolina in the morning. Well, it is a fine morning in Carolina today. Speaking of songs, many of you have asked me about our theme song each week, From the Bridge. It's called Gone Fishing, and it was written and recorded by the late, great beach music musician, General Norman Johnson of the Beach Music Group, the chairman of the board. Today, I'm asking my lovely producer, Lindsay Collins, to play the entire song at the end of today's show. I think you'll like it. We're going to finish our series on Jeff Henderson's book, Know What You're For. Today, we'll talk about being for you, understanding what you individually stand for, and holding yourself accountable for those standards. And my special guest, Carol Stiff, who has led the Women's Sports Initiative at ESPN for over 2 decades, is the best example I know of being true to standards. She'll be here to talk about her amazing career and what's next for women's sports. So let's leave the pier and get this party started from the bridge. We started this series on Know What You're For with being for the customer. Then we talked about being for the team. And then finally, we talked about being for the community. But the final step is being for you. Well, what does it mean to be for you? Author Jeff Henderson says that too many people view success as being measured against others. Y'all know I'm a big Bob Knight fan, and Coach Knight wrote once several years ago, he defines success as performing to the limits of your potential, not someone else's potential. And Jeff poses a question: how do we all get closer to our potentials? That means you, me, and everyone has to decide to pursue their own personal potential. Because Jeff quotes the great Chick-fil-A founder, Truett Cathy, who often said, "If it's to be, it's up to me." Jeff writes that chasing potential requires us first to remain inspired. Inspiration drives us all, but it can be very fickle and vanish in a heartbeat. Remaining inspired while dealing with that old bugaboo, everyday life, is the challenge. Remaining inspired when everyone else around you, especially at work, is finding ways to kill your inspiration. Jeff writes you have to develop what he calls brand you. My pal Vince Thompson recently wrote a book about just that. Your personal brand is what you are for and what you are known for. So how does each of us improve ourselves? Well, Jeff lists 7 ways, and we're going to get to each of those over the next few coming weeks. My very special guest today is the great Carol Stiff, a legend in promoting women's sports at ESPN. Carol is one of my heroes for her tireless work to promote women's sports in a world that often seems to not get it regarding women's sports. They once said that the great actress, singer, and dancer Ginger Rogers could do everything her partner Fred Astaire did, only she did it in high heels and backwards. That would be a great way to describe Carol Stiff, who has worked successfully in the Good Old Boys Club for the betterment of women in women's sports. We've talked today about remaining inspired. Well, Carol remained inspired, often in spite of what the world and even others at ESPN, for that matter, were telling her about promoting women's sports. We're coming up next year on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the breakthrough federal legislation that led to the explosion of opportunities for women to compete in sports by forcing schools to provide the same opportunities for girls and women that they were providing for boys and men. So there's no better time than today to talk to Carol Steff, the Hall of Famer, about women's sports. Let's welcome Carol to the show. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here. I always ask all my guests to start with the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a very small town called Bernardsville, New Jersey. And I lived on this road named Pill Hill Road, and we were the only living stiffs in the city or the town.
I love that. I love that. You know, it's interesting. So many of our guests grew up in a small town, and it's interesting what small towns do, because I think so many small town people got a sense of independence, I think, early because of being in a small town. Did you find that to be the case with you?
Well, I was the youngest of six, so I had to find my independence, I guess. But I often went down the street and played with the boys in the neighborhood. There were no girls, and none of my sisters liked sports. So, I think the small town allowed you to find yourself early on, and for me, compete early.
Well, did you always play sports?
Yes. Yep. I think it's in my DNA.
And so where did you go to college?
I went to school at Southern Connecticut State University. It was State College at the time in New Haven, an excellent school for college basketball.
And did you, at that point, think you always wanted to coach?
I knew I wanted to get a degree in education, health ed and physical education, and coaching I really responded well to with my coaches, and I just liked being around them, and so I knew I was going to end up in that direction.
Well, we share that. My undergraduate degree was in health and physical education. That's all I ever wanted to do was be a coach, and growing up playing, all sports and doing that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but was Coach Don Donaher your uncle? He
certainly was. My mom had four brothers. She was the only girl. She was the oldest, and the youngest was Don. And the three in the middle became priests. They all became priests. It was amazing.
Priest and a basketball coach. That's interesting. I don't know which one talked to God more. He's one of the, I think, kind of one of the forgotten figures. He took Dayton to the Final Four, and was a tremendous basketball coach. So I guess you were able to see him and watch him, and that gave you kind of some thinking about maybe going into coaching. So you get out of school, and then what'd you do?
So the first job out of school, I obviously was having a hard time finding a phys ed position. They were hard to come by. And I got a call from Western Connecticut State University in Danbury. They had reached out to Southern and asked for some applicants for the head field hockey adjunct professor and could take some courses toward their master's work. And so my name rose to the top. They interviewed me, and after the interview was over on campus, they said, "You got the job." And I said, "Fantastic." And I said, "When do we start?" And she goes, "Camp starts tomorrow."
That's a lot of notice there. That's good. Yeah.
I got thrown into the fire.
Well, that was, I often think that when you do get thrown into the fire, then you just have to get after it. You just start. And I would kind of think that maybe, your role at ESPN was a little about being thrown into the fire too. When did you actually get to ESPN?
So after Western Connecticut, I did coach for a total of 5 years, pivoted into basketball as a head coach at RPI in Troy, New York, and then finished my career at Brown University in Providence. And then in 1990 is when I made the pivot from coaching to come into this very small cable sports network that needed some help on their, excuse me, on their 10th anniversary party. And who doesn't want to work on a party? But truth be known, all I knew was how to turn a TV on and off. I knew nothing else about television, but immediately fell in love with the fast paced, we can do it attitude. The small little blue engine going up the mountain. We can do this, we can do this. And I just loved learning all about it, showed up early for work, did whatever they asked me to do, and fell into the programming department that same year. And so from there on, it was history in the making after that. But one day, a gentleman named, who you might know, Tommy Ojaxian.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Worked for us for years. Yep. And he gave me my start in the programming of women's basketball. So a few years of learning about Nielsen ratings, a few years of coding and data inputting. And then one day he just came up to me, it was in September, and he said, look, I'm programming all college sports for ESPN. We only had ESPN at the time. He said, I just don't have time to get to the women's basketball scheduling. I know you played, I know you coached, so here are the files. Could you do this? And it was September. And usually by September, your production has a schedule, and we're on our way. But so that's how it all started.
I'm a big believer in what I call personality and culture and matches. We've talked about, Jackie Robinson when he, integrated baseball, was not only a great player, but Branch Rickey picked a guy that could take the abuse, the personality. And I remember years and years later, Coach Bryant, the first black athlete he signed at Alabama, was a running back named Wilbur Jackson. And Wilbur Jackson's mama was a high school principal, and his daddy was a superintendent of schools, and he was another personality that could take it. You grew up playing with guys, and so you get thrown in there. Really, ESPN was a good old boys club, and you were able to navigate that in a way I think that maybe other women might not have been able to do that. And so now you've gotten this really great opportunity to start promoting women's basketball. So what happened then?
So let's see. So a few things happened. One of the first years on the job of putting matchups together, it was really simple, Rick. I mean, you look at depth charts, you look at who's recruiting who, and you have a sense of who's going to be strong in the next several years. The beauty of women's basketball in the college ranks is that they stay for 4 years. So you can really plan well for success. And so early on, I did put the UConn Tennessee game together, talking Pat into playing outside the SEC conference, which was really strong at the time, to play UConn, who had this woman named Rebecca Lobo and Jennifer Rosati and Jamel Elliott, and we're still really not known, but the game had to be between a Big East school at the time. It was supposed to be ACC, but it turned out to be an SEC game. And so Pat, to her credit, said, for the good of the game, I'll take the game. So that was one pivotal time. The other pivotal time in college basketball that helped me was the Olympic team of '96, winning the gold along with all those women's teams winning softball and soccer and gymnastics. And it was a golden opportunity, using a pun there, to showcase women's sports and especially women's basketball. So from there, we just started putting matchups together. And then we renewed our NCAA contract. That was massive for the growth. We became the exclusive home of the women's basketball tournament, also around that 95, 96 era. And what that, Rick, allowed us to do was to own the tournament, which is the crowning of a national champion. Prior to that, we only had 4 regional final games, and CBS had the final 4 in the national championship game. So That's 7 total games of women's basketball that was showcased nationally. And so, as we went through my years there, we kept adding on to our coverage. And most recently, this past year, we produced every single game of the tournament in a full national window. And that's what the game deserved. So going back to 96, that was another pivotal time. And then in 1999-ish, no, let's go forward like 2004, the Diana Taurasi era came along. And, we had the UConn-Tennessee game still going strong. But what I noticed, Rick, was that all of our games were on Sunday afternoons. And if you know sports like I know you do, everything is played on Sunday
Yeah,
afternoons, from
yeah,
tennis to
terrible,
golf.
terrible competitive window. Yeah.
It's horrible. It was just lost. And so after the Diana Taurasi era finished and we got these unbelievable NCAA tournament ratings, I went into John Wildhack, who was the head of programming at the time. He's the AD at Syracuse now. And I said, John, look at these numbers. You can't argue. Is there any way I could have a prime time window during the week instead of a Sunday? So he did allow me to program on ESPN2 Big Monday, which we've had ever since John said yes to that. And then after that, fast forward again, we had some unbelievable Final Four numbers, most recently in the last 5 years. So I went into Burke Magnus, now the head of programming, president of programming and acquisitions for ESPN. And I said, look, Big Monday's great. It's on ESPN2. It's up against the ACC men. Is there another window I could have? I'm looking at Thursdays in January. Is there any chance I could get those 4 or 5 windows? I'll give you the very best matchups we can get. So he said yes. And now we have on ESPN 4 or 5 windows with, always top 25, if not top 10 matchups.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, you mentioned 96. We've talked about the 50th anniversary of Title IX next year. I think 96 was the year that harvest came home.
Mm-hmm.
You had so many elite women's athletes that had finally been given the fair amount of coaching opportunities and all that. And then it was a steady progression from that. The other thing I think a great lesson is you talked about Pat being willing to go up and play Gino, and your matchups that you now have on Thursday night, these tend to be very nationally recognized games. And I think it's been the willingness of women's basketball coaches to say, this may not be the best thing for my program, but it's the best thing for the game. And you've been able to do that. You've been able kind of to be the glue that gets people that have not been around women's basketball do not understand it is every bit as competitive and cutthroat as any other sport. Coaches want to win and players want to win, but they've been willing to kind of put some of that aside to take advantage of growing the game. I think there's a little bit more of a solidarity in the women's sports movement that I think is helpful. Did you find that to be the case?
Funny you should mention that. Jay Billis, maybe 2 years ago, was writing about the ACC. I think it's the ACC Big Ten Challenge or ACC SEC. I'm sorry, I can't remember.
No, it is ACC Big Ten. They play that. Yep.
Okay, so it's not in the November December era. It's in the meat of the
in the
regular
January. Yep.
And he went on and on about this is great for men's basketball. You can step aside from your conference. You can play schools that you're going to possibly see in the tournament or at their caliber. And he went on and on and on. I had to just send him a text. I go, women's basketball has been doing this for years. And he just laughed and said, kudos to you. But you're absolutely right. I think it's fabulous for these schools to take maybe their bye date and go and play someone that's nationally ranked. It not only helps their profile or portfolio or whatever analogy you want to use for the tournament seeding, but it also gets them ready, set, and go for the tournament. So we'll continue to try and push that. I hope ESPN continues to do that. I think it's remarkable to have like a Baylor UConn game the first week of January coming out the gate. And like I said, I hope they continue to do that. But I wanted to get back to your one point about working with men in my tenure at ESPN, and I'm if we didn't have men that listened to reasoning behind what we need to do to elevate women's sports and women's basketball specifically, then I don't know where we would be. But there's some really great allies at ESPN that have listened over the years. It's called diversity and inclusion. It's a new demographic that we're seeing that's engaging with women's sports. Therefore, we can sell to. So I just want to make sure I covered off on that point that you made earlier.
Well, yeah, it is interesting that the numbers don't lie. I mean, one of the great success stories is the women's NCAA softball championships on ESPN. Sure. I mean, unbelievable numbers. I mean, which proves there is an audience there if you will put us in a window that audiences are used to tuning into.
Yes. Let me give you a little anecdote on the softball. So early on in the I programmed in 21 championships along with my basketball and the WNBA. And so softball obviously fell under that umbrella. And we were playing a game, you probably know better, when Roger Clemens was pitching and he was on the mound. It was Memorial Day Monday. Yankees had just won the pennant the year before. And we go into a rain delay. And so we get into this rain delay, and the women's championship softball game from Oak City was coming up around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on that Memorial Day Monday where most people are out picnicking. And I had to call the NCAA and just let them know that, look, we're in a rain delay in Yankee Stadium, and by rules with the Major League Baseball contract, we can't leave until the umpire either calls the game or we finish the game. So therefore, go ahead, throw your game, pitch your game, get out there and crown a national championship. We're going to tape delay it on Monday night. And trust me on this, I think it will outrate this Yankee game, and you're going to see great results. So sure enough, they play the game. We don't run it on the ticker who won. And wham, bam, home run was made that day. And once again, went back into John Wildhack's office and said, look at these numbers. Everyone was home, getting ready for work the next day. Perfect location for that crowning the national champion. I said, men's baseball has a super regional round of games, and women only have regionals and then the World Series. Is there any way, looking at these numbers, we could put a super regional round of games in? And he said, if you can figure out the puzzle pieces, go for it. And so that's from that. Once again, the proof is in the pudding, right? It's like unbelievable number, great window. Therefore, we added more. So that's how the super regionals came around for softball. And then we put in the best of 3 finals after a UCLA Michigan championship game that rated unbelievably well. And I said, we need 3 of these. We don't need 1 of these. So that's how the softball grew. I just wanted to share that with you too. It is fabulous, and it's a lot of men watch it. It's amazing. A lot of men play softball.
Oh, there's no question. I think that, somebody asked me one time, they said, Rick, when did you really become a champion of women's sports? I said it was really easy when my daughter was born. I mean, I grew up in a family of all boys. We didn't have any girls. And suddenly I have a daughter. Do I want my daughter to have the same opportunities? Damn right I do.
That's right.
And I think we saw that. And obviously at a time that Title IX had legislated schools in the ability that they could no longer discriminate. They had to be able to offer those opportunities. But you worked for a commercial enterprise. I mean, I was reminding someone earlier today, I don't think there's a money tree in Jimmy Pitaro's office. Things have to be commercially viable. And you had to go through and make sure that every step of the way, not leaps, but steps, you would prove women's sports would be commercially viable at ESPN.
Yes. Yeah. That's, I'm often asked, Rick, what what keeps you up at night? And you might have seen this in an article or two, but what keeps me up, still keeps me up at night, is why women's sports isn't selling in Madison Avenue. And I don't understand, these women stay in college for 4 years. They're role models. They volunteer in the community. They graduate with a degree that could be in medicine or law while competing at the highest level in college. They know how to lead. They're leaders. I could just go on for another hour here on the positive attributes of these female athletes. And for me, if I were, the president of, let's use Target as an example, why wouldn't I want my brand associated with that brand? And I was also always, told, well, they don't rate, Carol. When we program, the hours of programming that we have they just don't rate. And I said, well, if we put them in a window where they could rate, then you're solving the issue. So, getting out from that Sunday is massive. I'll give you another great example is the women's Final Four was on a Friday night on ESPN2, and the NBA was on ESPN. Once again, went into Burke Magnus, showed them the numbers. We were outrating the NBA. We were outdoing the NBA on ESPN. It was a regular season NBA. It wasn't playoff time, but it was leading up to playoff time. And so this past year, and it would have been a year earlier, excuse me, if we didn't have COVID, we had already planned to move those national semifinal games over to ESPN.
Well, one of the things that I don't understand is sometimes just the whole idea of ratings versus the loyalty of an existing audience and what their purchasing power is. I've always said there's a lot of wastage in ratings. Let's take tires for a minute. When do you buy tires? When you need tires.
Right.
Okay, that's when you need tires. So how many people are watching a tire commercial today that need tires? Only those that need tires. And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of a it's just a little overrated about ratings, from that standpoint. The other thing is Madeleine Albright once said there was a special place in hell for women that won't help women. We have a lot of women executives. We did a study a couple of years ago, and the common denominator of women executives in C-suites were they all played college athletics.
Yep, 98%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Now, I want to ask those women, why aren't you helping women's sports now?
So I think we're seeing a movement in that direction, Rick, and I'm really excited to share that. I worked on the WNBA, and having Kathy Engelbert now as the commissioner, who you might know, the CEO of Deloitte. I think she had 100,000 people reporting up to her. Now, if you look at the games, you see Deloitte all over the court. We ESPN and our sales group did a terrific job with Google this past off season. Google's head chief of marketing was an Olympian rower, and Kate Jackson, and she is demanding to see the women's sports portfolio now, and is doubling down on the WNBA and hopefully more of the portfolio. You see AT&T coming to the table now, run by women. And you look at Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yeah, great example.
Yeah, great example. And then Nike stepping it up a little bit more, which is nice to see. They just released some advertising with Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe. Timing couldn't be any better going into the Olympics, so that was well set. And I think social justice has helped women's sports. And what we saw last year with George Floyd and such the demand for social justice and the WNBA leading the way and Black Lives Matter, I think that's also helped expose women's sports for what they really are.
No, I think you make a great point. I remember years ago I had a buddy, Roy Spence, who was the president of an ad agency in Austin, Texas, GSD&M, and he talked about how they were purpose driven. They were purpose-driven agency, and they looked for what they called brands that had specific niches. And I kidded him one day. I said, "Roy, no, that's great, but you're Walmart's agency." He said, "Yeah, they have 92% of the people in America shop at Walmart. It's a great niche." And I laughed. And then I thought the other day, I think women control about 80% of the purchasing power in America.
Exactly.
Why haven't marketers woken up to that reality? But like you said, it's going to take now women executives that are going to be the ones to say, I'm going to lead the way and go from there. Let me ask you this, because I don't want to be controversial, but it's always fun. Talk about, if you can look back on your career at ESPN, where were some opportunities that were unmet? That, if you had your game over, you'd like to say, hey, I think this would work or that would work?
That's a great question, Rick. I'm going to point to, once again, sales and what I always called low-hanging fruit. And maybe the model needed to be tweaked a little bit. I always thought, way before Shark Tank, we should have a lot of hungry little bees come together and put together, a red team and a white team, and give them the low-hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is our portfolio of, golf, tennis, women's sports, NCAA championships other than football, just the inventory that wasn't being sold out. And then have this red and this white team go out and sell it. And the team that came back with a few $1 million worth of advertisement got full-time jobs at ESPN sales. So I think looking back, I wish that we had doubled down on the low-hanging fruit. And as for programming, it was key that when we renewed a lot of our college contracts, that the conferences came to us and said, we want to expose our Olympic sports, and put it in writing and put it into the contract. And that was actually a positive. Therefore, we had to deliver on more hours of women's basketball or women's softball or women's volleyball or soccer. So I'm not giving you a great example of what we missed, but thank goodness that those conferences thought, and ESPN also thought of other sports that could grow. So growth opportunities were always really important for us to, like I said, double down on. And I wish we had done that sooner.
Well, I live on a tidal river, and at low tide, I don't have enough water for the boat. And so I have to watch the tide before I launch the boat. We have an interesting tide right now, I think, that can be so advantageous for women's sports. Number one, you mentioned the social justice issues and the equality issues, but we also have an Olympic Games coming to America in 2028. And I think there's this unique window right now that can be exploited in a different way. Rob Temple, who worked with you for years and years, is now our new CEO. And when he was at Host, before he joined ESPN, when he wrote the architecture for the NCAA Corporate Partner Program, he wrote this third tier. And the third tier allowed the other sports to not sell against competitive categories that Turner and CBS had sold, but go after other categories. And that still has never come to fruition. And I think it's time for that. I looked at the disparities that came out of the women's championship this year, and the weight room and just a whole lot of inequality still that existed. And I think there are brands like Dick's and others that would have said, I'd like to support just women's sports and not have to spend the millions of dollars to support March Madness on the men's side. I think that's an unmet opportunity in the marketplace right now, because I think the tide is turning towards women's sports.
I think you're absolutely right. I hope that some findings from this Kaplan report, which is due out on the inequalities that we saw in March in men's basketball and women's basketball, shine the light on that. I also want to just make sure that I mention the fact that I think the timing, using your tide, is also important, that we have streaming. And streaming has allowed us to showcase a plethora of sports and storylines and behind the scene content that we never had before. And then the ACC network, SEC network, and Longhorn network also help expand the hours of programming. So I want to make sure that I threw that in there as part of, getting through, the 90s and the 2000 and now into 2020 and beyond. But streaming is going to be an important part because people can see when they, you can time. You don't all have to be in prime time anymore. And I think
I agree. And you proved then the issue of what I call the loyal audience. So many sports fans can be fickle, and yet women's sports fans are not fickle. They are constant. And again, I go back to that tire analogy. They're ready to buy now, and it's the right audience for so many reasons. One of my partners, Mike Millay, ran the Disney Wide World Sports Complex for years, and he would talk about, he said, look, you bring a men's tournament to Disney, you put 4 guys in a room. You bring a women's event to Disney, you fill up a whole hotel room because mom comes, dad comes, grandma comes, everybody comes. And so I did some research one time and found all the sports commissions were like, if we want to have a soccer tournament, we want to make sure it's a women's soccer tournament because we fill up hotel rooms. And so it's like at some point I want to go, look, just look at the numbers here. And the number is dollar signs, and I think sometimes people don't do that. But I do agree with you that this may be the time. And I know now that you've left ESPN, what do you want to do next that can further the mission?
Oh boy, I want to get some sleep at night. Number one. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I just want to figure out how we can crack this nut here and figure out how to sell these wonderful storylines and competition and competitiveness, and they cheer for one another, and not solely look at the ratings. I know they're important, but they deserve the support of Madison Avenue, and it's time. And I want to get some sleep, so I want to continue to look at that. I really like the college space. I think there's some key learnings that we can take away from COVID-19 that could be implemented here. I was watching the Olympic softball last night, and they have rules that move that game along a lot quicker than what we use in college. And I actually tweeted about it last night and said, hey, maybe we should look at some of these rules. Like the batter has to keep a foot in the box. The pitcher has to keep a foot on the mound.
Yeah.
Doesn't have arm wrap to look at plays or what they want, a pitch call or whatever. And that game just zoomed by quickly, and it was fun and it was fast paced. And people's attention span isn't as long as we once had. So there's some key learnings there, but I want to just keep giving back to the growth of women's sports in short.
Well, I think next year with the 50th anniversary of Title IX, it's going to be such a celebratory. I know one of the last things that you were working on at ESPN was kind of a series that's going to document, what has happened in women's sports since Title IX was legislated. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks, Rick. We announced during the sales upfront a project called 50/50. That will be the working title for our 50th anniversary and documentation of Title IX, which is June 23rd, 22. So, yeah, we have Dawn Porter, who's a fabulous producer, produced for many films, but one is the RFK assassination at 40 years and some other social justice type films. So she's going to put together a 4-part series for ESPN. So what we're going to do is we launched it. We're going to hit it again. We're going to announce something in October at the ESPNW Summit. Then in early January, we hope that a lot of our college and pro athletes will start wearing a 50/50 patch, not just on women's jerseys, but men's jerseys. It's 50/50 is equality for all, by the way. It's not just for women's sports and women in college. It's for equality in college, and any school receiving federal money has to has to abide by Title IX's law. And then when we get to March, we will really start rolling out more stories. We're planning on doing 50 stories to go with the 50/50. They could be short form. They could be a podcast like today, and they could be the film. It's a 4-part series film. And once we get to June 1st, which will be right after the College World Series, the month of June is just going to be full and chock full of amazing content. And Dawn Porter's film will debut on that first Wednesday and go every Wednesday. Last note is this is a rollout across company-wide, which means all of Disney's platforms. We had spoken to even Hulu, Nat Geo, of course, all the Disney platforms. And this is not just an ESPN, rollout of content. It's across all of our platforms Disney-wide, and we're hoping that the college entities will wrap their arms around this as well. That all the conferences are starting to talk about it and getting their plans rolled out. So it's exciting times, and it was fun to work on that project.
Well, I do believe the tide is turning, and I will say this: you've been a big part of that tide turning. The times we've worked together has been a joy. I know so many people that owe you a debt of gratitude for what you've done to help grow women's athletics. And I know you're not finished, and I think it's going to be really exciting. And I just really, Carol, can't thank you enough for being with us today from the bridge.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. Thank you, and good luck to you.
It's now time to jump back up on the soapbox. I have a confession to make to all of y'all today. Like so many people, I hate to admit it, but I am prejudiced. I'm prejudiced against sorry people, lazy people, incompetent people, thoughtless people, and yes, people who are prejudiced against others because of race, sex, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. I simply do not understand racism or anti-Semitism or why women are paid less than men to do the same job. I just don't get it. My son wrote a terrific rap song a few years ago called Labels. The first stanza asked this: is George straight? Is Marvin gay? Is Clint black? Is Barry white? In other words, why do we label human beings and then look down on them because of these so-called labels? I hope I live up to a standard to see and accept people as they are and not label them. I hope I have and will continue to be a champion for giving all sorts of folks an opportunity. Years ago, when I worked at Advantage International, there was a joke that you were either one of Harlan Stone's boys or you were one of Rick Jones's girls. I'm lucky that people felt that way about me. And I'm lucky that I have my own Carol Stiff in my life and in my business that makes both me and our business better every day. Her name is Brittany Schiller, and we've worked together for over 15 years. She does all the things I don't do or don't know how to do or really don't care to do, which is really the truth. Our clients love her because she takes care of them like she takes care of me. Oh, yeah. Brittany started as an intern at the Women's Basketball Coaches Association and then joined FishBait as employee number 1. She's now a senior vice president and oversees our college sports division. How'd she do that? Simple. She had an opportunity. She took advantage of that opportunity and did it the old-fashioned way. She earned it. So let me ask you, who's out there looking to you for that same type of opportunity? Please give it to her. And that's my view from the soapbox. Speaking of Brittany, as you know, we are a virtual agency with everyone working for their homes in now 8 different states. I recently was up visiting and working with Brittany at her Pasadena, Maryland home. And while I was up there, I found a terrific diner near her house for lunch on the road with Rick. It's the Double T Diner, and there are several in that Maryland area. Now, it's the classic diner food with a huge menu. Let me repeat myself. A huge menu, a phone book menu. I know many of you are out there saying, what's a phone book? But there used to be these things that were really, really thick, and that's their menu at the Double T Diner. They have gigantic breakfast, wonderful homemade soup, salad so big you take half of it home, plus the diner classics like chopped steak, grilled pork chops, chicken parmigiana, steaks, and pasta dishes. And they also have Greek food since the owners are of Greek descent. Plus, you're in Maryland, so they have great seafood too. I had a soft shell crab sandwich plus a cup of clam chowder, and it was wonderful. Charlotte had a grilled chicken salad with all the fixings. Next time you're in Maryland, look for the Double T Diner. If you can't find anything you like here, then you'll never be happy. It's the Double T Diner on the road with Rick. Wow, what a show. Thanks to Carol Steff for both being my guest and for everything she has done and continues to do for women's sports. We'll see you back here next week.